what I noticed from your videos, it seems like you have a very a kind of you've described yourself as having sort of conservative values, traditional family values. Is that a good estimation of your viewpoint?
Oh, yeah, definitely. But probably in the sense that I just think that there is a lot of value to traditional relationships that we've just chucked out the window because we've associated it with women being oppressed and men being, these awful monsters that would just tell women what to do. So instead of picking all the good bits out of it and keeping the good bits, we've just sort of done away with all of it. And I think that there's a lot to be said for trying to retain some of that. So I think that's where I became a fan of it. So, yeah, I would describe myself like that. And
Okay.
Wouldn't you describe yourself a bit like that as well? Or
Yeah, although I would sort of have to add a caveat because I do believe in a traditional family sort of unit. That's not to say that I don't agree with homosexuality. That's we're talking about feminism today. I'm not one of those traditional marriage homosexual excluders. But that's not the subject today. We're talking about we're talking about women, but,
definitely not.
I'm just saying that traditional marriage is not a dog whistle for homophobia. I couldn't even remember the word. It's so I didn't even hit the word homophobia anymore. But that's not me saying
that's
that's not that's not the subject. We're not going to go into that. I do believe that it's the best thing for me, if that makes sense. That's what a traditional marriage with a traditional family is what I want for myself. But in general, I have a kind of principle of not judging other people's lifestyles and not assuming what is best for other people. So I wouldn't want to make an overarching statement about all women, indicating that it's that my lifestyle is what is best for everyone, because I just don't know what is good for other people in that sense. So although I am conservative in my private life, it's not something I would want to impose on anyone else. And I don't think you want it to be sort of mandated by law. I think what we're talking about here is what is encouraged by society, or what is and what is discouraged, what is normalized, and what is somewhat what is counted as the unusual choice. And at the moment, it seems like getting married, especially for women, is something that doesn't happen until a bit later. It's seen as a little bit, what do you call it? It's seen as a little bit old-fashioned to marry the first man you go out with.
Yeah, and I'd also say that, and this is actually a little bit personal, because I used to say to my mum, I just want to get married and have kids, Mum. That's what I want to do with my life. And she would look at me and say, you're throwing your life away. Because, my parents had spent a lot of money on, private schools, and they wanted me to, be this massive overachiever, which I probably have ended up becoming. But the whole time they just sort of had this view that if I just settled down and locked myself in the home, that would be throwing away all this potential. So I think that getting married early, there's a lot of sort of stigma and shame about it for women these days. And I think that actually does play on all of our minds, because when I was, in my late teens, early 20s, I didn't date with an intention to marry, because I just thought, well, this is not what we do these days, but didn't really think much into it. But thinking back, it would have been because that social pressure to, be an amazing human being outside of the home.
Okay.
And does that make sense?
Yeah, although I do think we're tangling up two different things, because there's the traditional wife and mother who doesn't have a career, or at least doesn't have the career as the center of her life the way men do. I think it's related, but it's not exactly the same idea as this settle down early, find a man who's good and marry him. Don't shop around and date loads of different guys the way that it's quite normal to do now. I think those two traditional ideas, they do often come hand in hand, but I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So
yeah.
I don't know about you. I mean, you're a career woman. We've talked about that. And as am I. Well, for now.
Yeah.
And although that is we could talk about that if you want. That wasn't what I was expecting to talk about today, but
No,
it
I
is
thought we were
certainly
talking
interesting.
about. No, definitely. I agree. I thought we were going to be talking about the problem with modern relationships or modern love or casual relationships, casual sex, basically just
I guess
modern dating.
the normalization of casual sex, I guess is what I was planning to talk about. I don't know how related that is to the entering of women into the workforce, and not just as, you know, secretaries and typists and sort of jobs that the women used to do, you know, being primary school teachers and that sort of thing, but entering men's more like real career work, like men's work, that you really need to dedicate your life to in order to get somewhere with it, if it makes sense.
Yeah. I think there's going to be so many factors as to how this arose. It was going to be feminism, and which, women went into the workforce. We pushed back the average age of marriage and first child, so there's a lot of extra dating between, you know, then and when you get married, and then there was contraception. And I made a video about this actually, basically how it suddenly we don't get pregnant when we have sex anymore. So it makes it a lot easier to just sort of have these carefree relationships that are purely physical with no intention of something more serious, which I think is really eroding how we view relationships with people and also ourselves. I don't think it's very respectful for other people or for ourselves to flit in and out of these relationships. But look, I think that it works for some people. For sure, I think it's been good. But
I think that is the question. Is like, I think it's pretty obvious that there are some. I mean, I don't know, but there are some women, and quite a lot of women, who say, you know, these young women, they say like, this is works for me. This is what works for me. I like having a bit of fun. I don't particularly I don't put much value on my virginity or on my, you know, being chaste, you know, being committing myself to one man. I'm just having I like having this lifestyle. I like meeting guys, and you know, it's not. They claim it's not having any detrimental effects on them at all, because of course now, like you said, we're protected from STDs much more than we were before. We're protected from pregnancy to a pretty high degree, and we even have abortion if for some reason birth control either isn't used, or if it's not used properly, or if it's just accidentally a pregnancy occurs. We're pretty protected from that. There's a lot of mechanisms that women can use to protect themselves from the physical effects of casual sex. But like we said, I think the psychological effects, it may not be obvious that those are taking. It might not be obvious that the psychological things are affecting women until much later, right? They might regret it later, and that's something I'm sort of interested to ask. Like, I'm interested in how many of these women find it hard to settle down, either because they wait too long, or because because men are less interested in settling down with a woman like that once they know their sexual history and they kind of have this impression of them. I wouldn't be surprised if some men find that unappealing in a wife, you know, it's not marriage material. And I wonder how much we, you know, as insofar as you and I and people watching this are part of the culture, how much should we be encouraging this casual sex, casual relationships, hookup culture, or discouraging it? Or because, I don't know, do you have any reactions to that? You're making a thinking face.
I've got two things and I don't want to forget them. So the first one is that I think with what you were saying, how do men view women who have now been in multiple relationships before they settle down? Well, the first thing is that there's the problem of fertility, which is actually a problem for both parties. But the second thing is that I think that there is a subset of men. Well, actually, I think this is men in general tend to like to know that a woman is totally theirs. I don't know how to explain this, but like own her in a sense and know that she hasn't been with other men. And I think this might hark back to evolution and knowing that, you know, she's not carrying the child of another man.
Yeah.
But I think there is that sense of ownership. So I think that the more that a partners that a woman has been with, even though it seems a little bit unfair, because I don't think women have an issue with men having multiple partners, or I certainly don't. But there is a little bit of a difference there. So I think there is potential to damage sort of our reputation as women. But the other point I wanted to make was that this culture is introduced to girls and boys at such a young age that there's no way they could possibly know what the ramifications of entering into this world are. And I think that not many people at 18 and 19 think, oh, actually, no, I'm just going to save myself until marriage over the next few years. Like, that's a very rare point of view these days. So I think that by the time that we realise the damage that we've done, a lot of the time we've already sort of, you know, we've gone out to the parties and all. Well, I think most people have. I think that's sort of the norm these days. So it would be lovely to go to schools and say, no, you guys, you need to, you know, make sure that the person that you are going to be in a relationship with is someone that you could see settling down with long term. No one's going to listen to that.
Yeah,
I just come across as...
I don't know if that's even good advice. I mean, there's being in a relationship,
it's not.
And then because you want to be able to, I think, at least go on a date with a guy, you know, just to check him out, just to you know, and maybe even date him for a few months. I think the question is how far to take that relationship physically. You know, how long do you wait? I mean, it's not. I don't want to set down like you must wait until the X date or like X months. That's I don't think that's, nobody's going to listen to that rule anyway. But it's like like a rule of thumb, like a heuristic. Like how much are you expecting this man to commit to you, and how much are you wanting to commit to this man before engaging in sexual activity, sexual intercourse? And that's obviously nobody sets down these rules.
No.
And I'm not suggesting that anybody's, you know, there's no rules to break as such, but there is. It's the culture, right? There's a culture of that amount that you're expecting a man to commit to you has now been decreased. It's less than it used to be, because a lot of people used to expect a promise of marriage or even marriage before sort of giving themselves away, right? Before giving up virginity, which used to be much more of an important concept than it is now. And I hear feminists like Lacey Green complaining about the female virginity as a concept, as something that women are taught to prize, like it's something special, like being a virgin is like a magical state of being. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a bit of an old-fashioned view now. Although Lacey Green still believes that it's alive and well, I'm not so sure. But I think it would be interesting to see how many young women who are virgins believe that it is something to hold on to, like some kind of magical, you know, like, I don't want to say magical like it's silly. I'm just saying that it has special properties above the physical properties that it has.
I don't know. I think
that was just
for
a big
people,
ramble.
Perhaps, I'm just wondering, maybe for people who are religious, that would come into it a little bit. But I don't know if women think it's a magical thing. I think men would think it's more of a magical thing, to be honest. That's just my opinion. But,
well, they don't seem to think it's that magical when they, you know, when they're 18 and they want you to give it up.
No, that's certainly true. It is kind of interesting, because I think that we talk about women being all into the casual sex, but it does take two to tango. So it's funny how we're sort of harder on women and not as hard on men. And I think feminists are really much into this, you know, trying to bring down this double standard. But the question I ask myself is, well, should we be trying to bring down this double standard, or should we just say, actually, we don't want women to have more casual sex. We probably need to talk to men about being careful with who they choose. So instead of having more of it and trying to make it equal, how about we wind it back? Which is just an interesting thought, and I don't think that we could ever do that. But it's funny how we think that, well, feminists have thought that to be equal with men, we have to do everything that they do. But it's not necessarily a good thing to be equal in that regard. Yeah. And you touched on, I think you just mentioned that, how is this going to affect our psychology, and how is it going to affect our ability to form long-term relationships? Because you know how they say that, you know, if you got a rip in your clothes, just go get another t-shirt or something, and we don't mend it. It's sort of the same with relationships. If he got angry at me the other day, so I'll just dump him and go get the next guy, because it's so easy to get guys. So it's sort of like this turnaround culture where we don't actually work hard at our relationships, and it's just really weird. And you wouldn't, I saved up a lot of money to buy my first car, and I did so much research, and I love my car, and I probably don't wash it enough, but if we did that with relationships, I think things would be a lot different. But these days I don't think that we put that much effort into trying to maintain a relationship, because we just can go through it so quickly. We've got contraception, so we know we're not going to get pregnant. So
I think maintain is a great word for that, actually. Just the constant maintenance that a long-term relationship does take, checking in with each other, checking in with yourself, and not letting anything go. Just the way that someone who loves their car takes care of it. Every single scratch and bump is something that is worth looking at and analyzing and fixing, because that's because it just gets worse over time. And that is, I think that's definitely, I can't say for sure how much this culture, like you say, I don't know how much that is affecting it. It does seem reasonable to expect there would be a certain amount of that. Certainly if you thought, I think if you, way back when you had to marry, when you're expected to get married at 18 or 20, I'm talking about obviously that age has crept up, and it's been 25, maybe 50 years ago, let's say. So maybe 25 would be a good idea. So
28 now, I think.
20. Yeah. Well, now it is. But I'm saying,
sorry.
if you got married at 22, say, and you, what am I trying to say? If you compare the girl who's been dating a guy for, say, 8 months when she's 22, compared to the sort of similar woman 50 years ago who is married to the parallel universe version. Am I making any sense? The difference between going out with a guy for 8 months and being married to that guy after dating him for the same amount of time, maybe they got married after 8 months. I would say that the 22-year-old who is going out with him is going to be thinking about other guys a little bit more. I'm not saying women are all treacherous and hypergamous or whatever. Or I'm not going to go into that. I'm just saying that just the fact that there's an opportunity there, for the one who's married, obviously she's just got married, so she's probably in the honeymoon period. But apart from that, the stigma against getting divorced back then meant that once you're married to a guy, you really are married to him, right? You really are, you do have to stick with that, and it does. I'm just putting into words what you were saying, because once you've committed to it, what it means is that you have to take the bad stuff now, and you have to figure out a way of making it work. Because
that's right. I think the word that came to my head when you were saying that is, it's basically you have a lot of investment to try and make that marriage work, because that is it for you. You're probably already pregnant. You can't get a divorce unless you can prove that he's been hitting you or whatever. So you've got a lot of motivation to try to make things work. So if you disagree on something, you've got motivation to make sure that you iron out all those problems so that you're going to have a happy relationship. And I think that worked really well. But I think now we've just got the ability to change things over so quickly. Why would we? Why would we settle down when we can just get another one really quickly?
I think the question is, after going through a few relationships like that, maybe they last up to a year even, after going through a few relationships, do you think it's possible that people get into the habit of not maintaining it, if that makes sense? So so that when you do get married or when you do enter a long-term relationship, you don't have the skill set to make it work, although of course usually in first marriages you probably don't have that skill set either way, but you might have this unhelpful skill set which is making you reflexively, without realizing it, devalue the little stuff. Maybe you'll just get into an argument, or You don't know how to maintain things, and you don't. What am I trying to say? You don't.
Yeah.
You already have the impulse to just ignore it, just to let it go, to changing the lighting.
Yeah.
You don't have the right skill set, basically.
No, you don't.
You have like an opposite bad skill set.
Well, yeah, I think I know that you probably don't know this, but I've been listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson lately, and one thing he always talks about is responsibility. And I think if we run away at the slightest problem and don't face the problems, we're just going to have this poor habit forming where we just don't take responsibility because we don't have to. So, you know, when you're a kid, and I think that I use this analogy quite a lot, but, you know, when your mum would make a salad and you'd go and pick out all the avocado or like the good bits, and then you never wanted to eat like the cucumber or the tomatoes. Well, that was me anyway. It's the same with relationships. We just want to have like all this amazing sex, and we just want to see them, you know, go to the beach together and like watch some movies. But when it comes to the hard stuff, we're just not prepared to take the responsibility. So we want all the good bits, but not all the bad bits, if that makes sense. And I think for some people, this has the potential to be really problematic for their ability to pair bond and form that long-term relationship. For others, I think it's actually a good thing, because I would say that for some men and women, actually going through and having different relationships would be a good thing. They would learn a lot about themselves. They would realise that, okay, so I don't, you know, I did the wrong thing here, and I should have been more tolerant in that. So in that sense, so I think that there's a lot of potential for practice at relationships, but I just wonder if there's more negative than positive overall. I think it would depend on the person.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the fact that if sometimes it's hard to judge with people's character. You hear these horror stories about people who only realized that their partner was a psycho or like just completely unreasonable. Like somehow they completely missed it until they were about to get married, until they did get married, until deep into the relationship, you realize this person has serious emotional problems. And that is something that I would love to be able. I love that we can better avoid that now, right? If you get married to someone and it turns out that they have, you know, serious issues with just living with you, or like they, you know, I'm sure you know the horror stories I'm talking about.
Gambling problem, alcohol, like all of the common stuff.
You find
tendency
out that,
to be violent. Yeah,
it's. I think that is. There are definitely some benefits to the new. You know, now divorce is more socially acceptable, and the sort of dating period is longer. People live together before getting married now. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I'm not trying to say people should get married, you know, like my parents did 6 months into the relationship, although it worked for them.
It could work for some people.
Yeah, definitely. I think it did work for a lot of people who do it. And they say that, I don't know how much this is accurate, but they say, you know, arranged marriages in cultures where marriages are arranged and they barely meet each other at all before getting married. Apparently, marriages there are very healthy. I don't know how much that is true, but obviously they don't get divorced, but maybe that's just because divorce is also not, you know, not very socially acceptable, or perhaps not even permitted in those cultures. But that's just something I've heard. I'd be interested to find out how much that is true. And I did make a video where I suggested that perhaps you could be married to pretty much anyone and make it work. You know,
If you really tried.
Yeah. Like to be honest, I don't think people who like find each other, people who are like good for each other, I don't think they're really that much better for each other than like 100 other people who they could have been out with, who they could have found. You know, I don't believe in that, like the one true love, or, you know, soulmates or anything. I believe your soulmate is whoever you're married to.
Yeah, well, you make them your soulmate, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just your incentive. Yeah. Something that I wanted to talk about was also how casual relationships and the ability to just be casual about who you choose affects the traits in the person that we go out with, the people that we go out with. Because I think that if you knew that you were going to get pregnant, or if you knew that pretty much the first guy you were going to date would be the guy you marry, you're going to be wanting to look for someone who has like these long-term qualities of stability, commitment, reliability, loyalty, all that sort of stuff. Whereas these days we don't even need to know that. All we need to know is that, would I have sex with this person? Would they make me laugh? That's it. I don't care about the rest of it because we can sort that out later, or we could just completely ignore it and move on to the next guy. And I just wonder about if that's affecting who we choose to be in relationships with. And then it gives us like this jaded view of how bad relationships are. And it's probably because we just weren't going into them with the view that we're going to marry this person, because we always used to have to do that. Because if you got pregnant, you would need to know that that man would provide for you. Or, you know, if you got a woman pregnant, you would need to know that she was going to be a good mother to your children, and not, you know, neglect them and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I just wonder if it's... Yeah. We think our relationships are terrible. Maybe it's because we're just choosing terrible partners. I don't know.
Well, just to get off that, I think that's a very good point. And I think it also, that encourages men to act a certain way, right? Like if men are seeing women are attracted to this kind of man, not the responsible guy you're describing, good husband material, they're looking and going like, well, if this is what women are going to be, I'm going to be irresponsible. I'm going to get a motorcycle and be I don't know, like I think on the internet it's called a fuckboy. You ever heard that expression? I think it just means an obnoxious man who somehow gets women. But I think that it, you know, in a larger sense, although this is something that conservatives say that I've never said before in my life, I think it could be contributing to the degeneracy of society. Right? I'm
so glad you said that. I think that there's a lot of people who believe that because we now have the choices in our partner has changed, that there's a lot of people out there who would make fantastic partners that just are getting overlooked because they don't have that initial attraction. It might be because, for men, it might be because they're short, or for women it's because they just don't seem initially that attractive on the outside. So I think that there's a lot of these good qualities that are being overlooked. And so what incentive do we have to keep those qualities? So why don't we just go and, you know, live our own life and not care about maintaining those qualities? So I think the value for loyalty and commitment is just gone rock bottom because it's not really needed anymore. I mean, that's a very negative point of view. A lot
of pretty pessimistic.
I think a lot of people do the right thing, but I think there's some people who get caught up in this and realise it a little bit too late.
Okay. Just to come off that, I know I already mentioned it earlier, but I just want to comment on the fact that you said do the right thing. And to me, that's I've just got this sort of reflexive part of me that doesn't want to tell other people what is the right or the wrong thing to do. I'm not trying to judge you for saying that. I would really like to know, I know it's impossible to know, I'd really like to know for how many people is this like the right thing versus the wrong thing, you know?
Sorry, what did I say the right thing about?
I think you were saying like doing the right thing being looking for good men who are like good husband material and sort of trying to commit a little bit. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. And although I think that is a good idea, I wonder how many people it is not a good idea for. Like we were touching on earlier, the sort of the people who say, you know, sort of young women and young men who say, I'm never settling down, I don't ever want children, so there's no point in me looking for good father material because I'm not looking for a father for my children, I'm just looking to have a good time and that's fine for me. I wonder how much can we say, well, look, if that's fine for you, then go ahead, you know?
Yeah, I think that would be fine, live and let live. But I think I was trying to get to the, before when I was saying that kids are introduced to this so young that I don't think they know what they want yet. And that by the time they realise that they actually wanted to be that person that wanted a long-term relationship, they may have already sort of gone through this culture and done things that they didn't want to do, or did things that they didn't want to do. But if someone doesn't want to settle down or have kids, that's fine. But I think that we do sort of, just because you don't want kids or you don't want to settle down doesn't mean you don't want to have a good relationship with somebody else. And I think everyone wants to have that. No, not everyone. Okay, there are some people who are happy by themselves, but a lot of people would also just like to have that meaningful relationship. So I think it's still worth looking for someone who has better qualities than just someone that you could throw away. Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course I know married and unmarried couples who have been together a really long time. They're just not interested in having children. You know, they just they like having lots of money. They like spending time together.
That's it.
You know.
That's good, and I'm glad that they can do that, because I think a long time ago, if you were with someone and never had kids, a lot of people would question you. But nowadays, there are just couples who do not want to have children, and even though they'll probably get called selfish, you know, behind their backs, I think it's so great that we don't judge them as much as we used to. So that's fantastic. So I think those people have won in this culture, if that makes sense. They've really won out.
Well, they're definitely getting the nicest holidays. You know, they're the ones going skiing, and you know what I mean. Like they've got all the free time, they've got all the money. I know.
And their nieces and nephews are going to win out big time because they've got no kids to pass it on to. I just think that there's a lot of people who, a lot of women who know that they want that long-term relationship, and men, and they just sort of realise that they've probably been doing the wrong thing. That's what I think. It's not wrong. It's just not the best thing. Yeah, I shouldn't use wrong and right. I should just use better and not as good, if that makes sense, in terms of how it affects them. Yeah.
I don't want to be like a postmodernist here. Like, I think I'm not trying to say like, oh, everything's fine as long as you say it's fine. You know, like there are some things, you know, we can say are good and bad, or like wrong and right in our society. Like, you know, we know it's wrong to commit crimes. It's probably wrong to be addicted to a drug or substance, right? Like, there are some things that is wrong to do. I'm not trying to be like, you know, completely hippie, whatever.
The other thing is that I do not know if there are studies on this, but I have a feeling that men have a much higher sex drive. So we know that they could pretty much have sex with anything with two legs. Okay, not really, but like definitely more so than women, because I think with women, sex is a lot more psychological. So if she feels safe, if she feels that this man is safe and reliable, she'll be a lot more inclined to have sex with that man, or at least enjoy it a lot more. I think that there's a lot more to be said for that, because I think women who are in casual relationships would be very stressed. I don't know how to explain this, but I think women get attached more quickly because they have to, and so they're also more likely to get hurt in these relationships. That's just my opinion. But from what I can see, I think women get stressed out if they are in a relationship with a man who they think is going to run away at the sight of another girl, or just is kind of flaky. I think that's really psychologically stressful for human beings, because we never used to have to deal with that. We would always have this, you know, this one person. So I just wonder if that, you know, we think that it's a good thing, but, you know, you say, oh, yeah, because look, you get to do all this stuff, you don't have any commitment. But I think deep down there's going to be a lot of tension wearing away at the minds of people who don't have those solid relationships.
Yeah, I think jealousy, I think there is a natural component to jealousy, although, of course, some women and some men are more jealous than others. I mean, I don't want to use this word jealousy as like necessarily a bad quality, because I think it is wise, especially in an early relationship, to be on alert for your partner, you know, having a look around. You know, you don't want to be the one who's committing more than the other one. In game theory, in the Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins talks a lot about game theory in partner selection and mating, because women have to commit more to a pregnancy than men do. In the natural environment, outside of societies, men could impregnate a woman and then just, you know, leave. So that's why the woman has to have a commitment from the man, which I think is probably one of the reasons why marriage developed as a custom in societies, is that before you get pregnant, you really want the man to be committed to you. And and like commitment is like a currency for women. And I read an article, I don't know if I sent it to you, about this idea of a currency of like, for men the currency is access to sex, like preferably for the man it would be to many women, but for women the currency is commitment. So she only wants to give up sex, which is what the man wants, in exchange for commitment, or for raising her young with her, which is her currency. And then sex is like this interaction, or like marriage or relationships is like this this transaction. And of course there is, emotions get involved, which kind of helps with the whole commitment and the whole raising children thing. It helps to be, these love feelings. Like I know it's kind of sounds cynical, but then there may be a very large biological, factor in in why we form these pairs together, for the benefit of the man who gets to guard the woman from other men. There's he when he commits, he in turn wants to know, like you said, that the woman isn't having sex with other men. Like she's not bearing someone else's child, because that's a real big loss for the man who's committed, who has been cuckolded, which is now a pretty popular meme.
It's a massive loss.
It's a huge loss in terms of environmental, in terms of evolutionary, game theory. The effort that he's put in is then lost, and he could have been having sex with other women. Is the real big kicker? It's an opportunity cost to raising another man's child, and that is a big. I think that's coming back to what I said before. There's a big biological component to the feeling of jealousy, I think, in men and in women. I don't know what I was getting at there, but I think
jealousy.
I don't think it gets the jealous boyfriend or the jealous girlfriend. Of course, it can go too far, like that archetype of the really, the girlfriend who's always texting and saying like, "Where are you?" or like the boyfriend who like goes and threatens all men who talk to his girlfriend. Like that's, of course, there's ways of taking it too far. But maybe I could use that as a segue to talk about it's pretty obvious. I think most people who have a basic understanding of evolution, of human psychological evolutionary psychology, know about the biological differences that I was just sort of alluding to between men and women in terms of dating, in terms of relationships, that they have a big influence on our culture, of the different it's called a double standard, right? The way that we see men who sleep around compared to the way we see women who sleep around, they're seen differently. They're sort of thought of differently. Even now in modern times, I think there still is a bit of a double standard. But there are biological differences there that means that although it does seem unfair, right, and especially back, going back more than 100 years, and still in some parts of the country today, women who are raped are seen as impure. Even when one of the most horrible things that can happen to you has happened to you, a man has forced himself on you, you are blamed for that. And I'm not talking about victim blaming of like, oh, you shouldn't have been wearing that, you shouldn't have been whatever. I'm talking about women who cannot get married anymore, or sometimes are stoned to death for being raped. Women who are tortured, or really horrible things that happen to these women who were raped. And I'm not trying to be, feminist going into all of that, but there is what was I saying? There's a double standard. There has been a double standard for a while. And although there are biological causes, it does seem unfair, especially in extreme cases like I was just talking about. Any input on that?
Yeah, I suppose, women are slut, men are heroes if they sleep around. It's just the way I feel like that's still huge. I know that that's still a double standard, but I suppose then we have to think about, is making that equal going to be good, or is it not going to be good? Just because it's unfair doesn't mean that it's doing us more harm, if that makes sense. Because as you said, there is a biological reason that women wouldn't want to sleep around, because men could have sex with 10 women a year and they could potentially have 10 kids. Awesome. Like, that's exactly what their genes want them to do. But a woman would say, okay, there are 10 men, I've got to choose one because I can only get pregnant once this year. So she's going to choose the best guy. So I think that there is a lot of biology behind that. So just trying to make it fair might not be the best thing for us as like a culture going forward.
Yeah, I think something I've been coming up against recently, just in general, is that what's unfortunate is that fairness, justice, does not always line up with pragmatism.
Yeah, that's right.
That has huge implications for what we choose as a society. Do we choose justice? Maybe justice isn't the right word. Like egalitarianism. Do we choose maybe not enforced equality? Yeah. Do we choose equality, fairness, or do we choose this pragmatic approach? And that's not obvious to me which is better, right?
Well, I think that we should say, look, you can all do what you want, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, being a man for a woman is going to be the best thing, or doing what a woman does for a man is the best thing for them. But they're allowed to do that, because there will be some women who love that. So I think that as long as we all have the opportunity to do whatever we want, it's still, I think a lot of people will figure out that the best thing is actually not to do that. But saying that, I think that a lot of people don't think that way, which is interesting. I think that especially feminism has sort of pushed that if you're not equal, it's not good. And so you've got to try and get that equality. And I don't know if I'm convinced of that, but I think a lot of women are convinced of that, and that's just what they believe. I don't know what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Something else I forgot to mention was that what you were saying about how men are heroes if they sleep around, or a stud. He's he's great. He's celebrated by other men. I think there's a component of that getting girls to have sex with you isn't that easy, right? And if you can get many women to do it, that does raise your status, and not in an artificial way either. I mean, getting girls to fall for you, especially without the currency of commitment. Especially if you're not even lying to them, like you don't even have to pretend to commit. Like a guy who marries women, impregnates them, and then divorces them, that's not a hero. Like, I don't think anybody celebrates that guy. It's the guy who can get women to give up that currency of sex without giving up the commitment. Like, if he can do that with multiple women, like, geez, like, what is this guy doing that is making this transaction so good for the women that they're taking it without even getting the commitment back? And that's not necessarily... he's probably pretty smart and funny to begin with. He's probably pretty good looking. Maybe he's tall. There's something about him that the women are liking, and that's not.
Well, maybe the women fantasize about having him commit to them.
Oh yeah.
Like maybe that comes into it. Although I think that if you're a good-looking guy who is 10 out of 10, women who has this great job and is funny and sort of like the loudest person in your group and takes charge, women are going to be attracted to that, so that guy's going to have no issue. But I think women aren't just attracted to them in terms of having a short-term relationship with them and having sex, so I think that's true, but they also like the idea of being with him long-term because he's got a lot of qualities that are ticking their boxes there. Yeah. But he doesn't need to commit to them, so
maybe it's a false transaction, right? Like the I've read a few articles by women who say that they are disappointed when you get into an interaction like this. I mean, not something I have a lot of experience with, but the idea of like a one night stand, like the man might be thinking of it as a one night stand, and maybe he even thinks about going further. Maybe he even thinks about this woman as being a potential mate on the night. when he's drunk and he's caught up in the moment, but often it doesn't go further than that, and maybe the woman was expecting it to. Like in the morning, when she brings him a cup of coffee or something, maybe she was expecting him to stay and like watch Netflix and just like hang out as friends and get to know each other, and maybe he's just like, I'd rather just go if that's okay. And that can be quite upsetting, I think. It could happen the opposite way as well, obviously, with the genders reversed, but it's not obvious that the women who say that they love this lifestyle are, maybe, it could be more upsetting than they're letting on. the next morning. Like that feeling of disappointment, that can't feel good if you're expecting something and you don't get it,
I think that's true, because I think going back to, men don't really have sex with the idea to commit a lot of the time, because that they never had to do that. But women always had to do that. So even though, we can these days because of contraception, we just sort of, we still want to have those connections, but we just don't, because we have multiple relationships. And so I think I think it's more damaging for women psychologically than men, because I just think women want to have that bond a lot more strongly than what men do, because men are certainly more interested in the physical aspect of it at the beginning, but women will very quickly change from the physical to the psychological. I think that there is a lot of potential for damage to a woman who can get hurt from these short relationships. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was, the rise of the commitment phobia and all that sort of stuff. I think that's just because, well, why would a man commit to a woman when he can move on? Because he can do everything that he wants to do and then just bugger off the next morning, and there's no social consequences for that. There might be internal consequences for the man in question and the woman in question, but no one judges them for that anymore, and there are no pregnancy complications generally anymore. Although contraception fails a lot more than what we let on. It really does. And I can vouch for this in my profession. It fails a lot. So there is also that side effect, that we are having a lot of kids out of wedlock to single mothers as well. And that's the result of these short-term relationships that weren't expecting to be long-term as well. Which is not good.
Yeah, I think thinking about the men's perspective of this, I didn't want to. I mean, I know a lot of. I think your audience and my audience are men, so probably a lot of men are watching this compared to women. And I wouldn't like to think that any of the men watching this think that we're characterizing men as this one-track mind, hates commitment.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, there's
definitely.
I don't know if it's an age thing or just depends on the man, but certainly. A lot of men do want that family life. I don't know if you've seen this. I saw a meme online, and it said, men only want one thing, and it's disgusting. And it's got a picture of a guy coming out. It's a 1950s picture of a guy coming home with with a briefcase, and his wife wearing a beautiful dress, housewife dress, and she's hugging him, all the children running to meet him at the door. I think that there are guys who want that, and of course they also have sexual desire, but that's not uncommon, right? I think there are men who want a family, who want, especially the men who are already married. I think probably a large percentage of them are truly committed. They enjoy that life.
I think
they enjoy the responsibility.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think that men really thrive when they do have that stable environment. It's just normal for a human to want to have something that they can always rely on. If you live in a state of flux, it's hard to function outside of the home and go to work and, bring home the bucks. It's so much easier to do that if you know that you've got something stable at home. So I think that men do want that. I think it's just that, they do have this larger sex drive. They just have to sort of deal with that and sort of work around that, because, I mean, it's not like once men are married, they might be attracted to other women, but they know that they value the loyalty of their wife over, potentially losing that and having an affair or something like that. So it's just about being human, and we're amazing, us humans. We have all these biological drives, we recognize them, and then we figure out ways around them. And some people do that better than others, and you just have to hope that you find the man who does that better than others, who realizes that long term he's better off with someone who's going to die by his side. And we know that men who are married live longer, I think by a couple of years or something like that. So I think that you just have to hope that we can work through that. Women, we have our own biological drives that we have to get through. So it's just different, and it's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just sort of thinking about it.
It is interesting. I just hope that more than anything that the conversation doesn't end because it's shut down by feminists. Because I think we need to be talking about this, right? We can't be we can't let this be something that is taboo to talk about, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think we're in danger of that yet, but I do think it's so important, especially for women, to talk about this and talk about our, like, the natural desire to, settle down, have children, to be honest about our sexual desires as well. And you made a video about bad boys, right? About the sometimes
That's
counterproductive attractions that women
That's
have.
right.
And I think
that's what we have to fight with. But
being honest, I think, is the most important thing. Like having conversations, talking to different kinds of women, and if there's any women watching this who are happy in that state of not settling down, whatever you call that. I don't want to call it casual sex, because sometimes it's not as simple as that. Sometimes it's just like a series of like 3-month relationships, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because like the first 3 months of a relationship, I honestly don't want to judge anyone who is enjoying like the honeymoon period. Like obviously there's a honeymoon when you get married, but like even before that, like just getting together with someone that you've maybe had a crush on for a while, or just someone you like, it's exciting. Having that
the discovery phase.
Yeah, like the not just the one night stand, but like the 3-month stand. I don't know. I don't even know if women like that exist, but I'd love to hear from women who are dealing with this and how it is affecting them psychologically, and whether they plan on settling down or whether they think it's going to be harder when they do. I think, like I said, just conversation is the most important thing. Honest conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that we just don't talk about this because there is a lot of stigma around shaming the what are we calling it? Modern dating.
Hookup culture.
Because I mean, I have actually spoken out about this with a lot of people, and on the outside they're probably saying to me, oh, you're just conservative, you just think that we should all be prudes and settle down. But on the inside, I think that a lot of them are like, actually, yeah, there's a lot of good points, and we just sort of have, a lot of shame talking about this. And I think it's just because we're taught, I don't know, I went to an all-girls school and we were just taught that, we're free and can do whatever we want. But there wasn't much teaching on the responsibility side. So I think that that's what we need to talk about, saying, is this going to make you a responsible person? You wouldn't buy a house if you didn't think about it. So would you really enter into this relationship? And if you've thought about it and you want to have that casual relationship, then great. But I think you just need to sort of figure out what the consequences are, because you do have consequences.
Not have that as the default position, I think, would be a good start.
Right, yeah.
Or maybe just to have no default position, right? Like, don't have marriage as the default, and don't have hookup culture as the default. Just have, I mean, it's hard, obviously, because in culture there's always like a default position.
There's always a default.
What I'd love is like the default position is like you do you, and it would be great if you could think about it for a little bit and actually make a decision. Think about who you want to be and how you're going to become that person. Like, how are you going to get the life that you want in a very Jordan Peterson self-authoring kind of way. And if you don't, if what you want to be is happy and carefree and, having lots of sex, then maybe the way to get that is on Tinder, right? I don't want to judge someone who wants that as their goal in life, because I believe, what do you call it? People should just have the life that they want, and I don't want to tell people that they should be getting married or they should be settling down. That's not for everyone, and it's not even possible for everyone. Not that I want to get into that, but have you got any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think that is exactly the message that we should be trying to get across, that there is no right and wrong for the individual, but we might be having a wrong view about what is our default position for a lot of women these days. So if we can just try to encourage women and men to question what society is telling them they should do with their relationships, then that would be a really, really good start. I mean, unfortunately, I think that kids these days, and I know young kids who have gone through a few boyfriends and girlfriends by the time they're 17, which is sounds crazy to me. So, you can't go and tell them that, but we could at least try to open the conversation up for some women and men who are seriously questioning about what is the best thing going forward. Should I go on Tinder and go and have 15 dates, or should I should I go to my friend's party and just meet one person and try to make a good relationship with them?
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought of a little goof to do. I was I was listening to Dan Harmon's podcast, Harmontown. I'm not expecting you to have heard of it if you haven't, but he did an Australian tour like a year ago, and in every town that he went to in Australia, he would do an Australian accent, saying the phrase "I like that hat, mate." So I was listening to this and I was thinking, like, I bet Georgia would love it if I said I like that hat. I like that hat, mate, in an Australian accent. But I like accent humor is like the lowest form of humor when talking to people internationally. But I do think it's funny. And I have some Australian viewers who I think would enjoy it as well. But I want you to say something in an English accent.
Okay, I think I'd be better at an English accent than you'd be at an Australian accent, because I think the Australian accent is overall known to be very hard.
Okay.
But who's going to judge this, though?
The comments. Leave a like if Georgia won, and leave a like if I won. Okay. You're right there. Nobody can really judge because, people who are English are going to be able to scrutinize your accent a lot better, and people who are Australian will be able to scrutinize my accent a lot better. But
that's right.
How about you say, do you want a cup of tea? Say that.
In your accent?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want a cup of tea?
That just sounded like you.
Oh.
But you tried. It's fine. I won't make you do it again if you don't want to.
No. I thought that I sounded exactly like you, but anyway.
Maybe it's not that different.
Do you want a cup of tea? A cup of... No, I think I'm terrible at that.
Not bad.
I think I'm going to lose this.
Okay. I like that hit, mate. How's that?
You sounded like you were from New Zealand.